Hey friends, I think this is where we left off, so I'm going to go with it. So, three-fourths, just talking about the white society, the aristocratic society in the South. Three-fourths of the South's white population could not afford slaves. They mostly lived in the hills as subsistence farmers, hillbillies, or poor white trash. This is where this derogatory term comes from, by the way. A number of small farmers lived in the frontier conditions in the slopes and valleys of the Appalachian and the Ozark Mountains. These people disliked the planters and they didn't believe in having slaves. During the Civil War, the mountain people, as they were called, would remain loyal to the Union. Very interesting group of folks. The South developed a unique culture and outlook on life, while white Southerners felt increasingly isolated from the rest of the country. And they also felt that they were constantly on the defense about slavery, constantly having to defend why they believed in the institution of slavery and why they needed to have, or why they believed they needed to have the institution of slavery in order to essentially survive. The South was basically still set up and running as an old-fashioned feudal society. The Southern gentlemen prescribed or ascribed to a code of chivalrous conduct. Everything had to be done in a certain way. Courting was a huge issue. Families coming together, marriages that were planned out. We'll be watching a little bit of Gone with the Wind, so you'll see this kind of played out. One of my favorite movies, by the way, and books, one of my favorite books. The upper class of the South valued education for their kids. And once the education was over, you could go into farming, law, ministry, and of course the military. We'll see where this comes into play later as a bonus for the South, because most of the Southern gentlemen went to military academies and came back to the South after. So they had good military leadership for the Civil War. The lower classes, however, schooling beyond the basics, early elementary grades, really was not widely available. Okay, now we're going to talk about, the South. I'm sorry, the West. The definition of the West kept changing in terms of its actual geographic makeup. By the mid-1800s, the West lay beyond the Mississippi River and reached to California and the Oregon Territory on the Pacific coast. American Indians, of course, were the original settlers of the West and, of course, of the entire North American continent. However, we know that since the times of Columbus, American Indians were being pushed and in some cases driven westward as white settlers came to their original homelands. By 1850, a large group of American Indians were living west of the Mississippi. Those living to the east of it either died of disease, died in battles, or had been forced to leave their lands by military action. The Great Plains was a place that could provide temporary respite from conflict with white settlers, that is, until it started to be populated later on. For natives on the plains, horses absolutely revolutionized their lives. It allowed for tribes to become nomadic hunters following the buffalo. And also having horses allowed them to move away from the advancing settlers more quickly than they would have been able to do before. Life on the frontier was not easy, was absolutely not easy. The West beckoned as a place promising great freedoms for all ethnic groups, American Indians, African Americans, European Americans, and eventually Asian Americans. But life on the frontier was actually very hard. Mountain men, these were men who had followed the footsteps of Lewis and Clark and also the trails of American Indians. They were typically hired as guides and pathfinders for settlers who were trying to cross the mountains, to get to their new homesteads or where they wanted to set up their new homes. Women, you had to be some kind of hardy, tough lady to move out west. Pioneer women performed daily tasks, including, but not limited to, acting as the doctor, the teacher, the seamstress, the cook, and also as a chief assistant to their husband. They didn't necessarily have more freedoms or rights in the West, but they were treated more equally in the West than they were in the North, and definitely not treated as the same in the South. They lived in total isolation with their families, and it was lonely, very lonely on the frontier. But women were asked to do the same backbreaking work that their husbands were doing, and most of them obliged. They knew that this was not they were not that they were going to go out west and put their feet up and have servants and maids, do their laundry. They were going to get down and dirty. The lifespan of those who lived out on the frontier was very short because, as we said, life was not easy. Pioneers did not really know what they were doing with the ground the earth that they were harvesting. They were poor stewards. They clear cut, they overplanted, they exhausted the soil, and of course, they also brought certain animals to the edge of extinction through their trapping. And we'll learn more about the railroad and the basic extinction of the buffalo as a result of that. So that's the second part of this PowerPoint. I'm going to start another one here in a couple minutes and post it, and it will be talking about the age of Andrew Jackson. Okay, see you soon.